opinion, ideas are like bugs. You need to trash them and park 90% of them. So a lot of startups fail to do this, and then they're kind of stuck in development hell where they're building the wrong thing. And a lot of companies don't do this. They just want this very regimented, very structured, very top-down process of developing products, which kills all the innovation that comes bottom-up, especially from engineers. So GPT, you need to embrace it as a tool, but you need to stay the pilot and keep judging whether or not it's helping you. So human judgment is still a very key part of product development, product management. You cannot just let go and just trust the process or AI algorithm.
Welcome to an exciting episode of Untrapping Product Teams. Today, Itamar Gilad, author of Evidence Guided, Creating High-Impact Products in the Face of Uncertainty, joins us. We will discuss what it means to be evidence-guided and the challenge of bringing it to reality. I'm delighted to have you here, Itamar.
So hi, thank you for inviting me. It's great to be here.
Great. So I'm holding your book here, and we're going to discuss a lot about this one here. And I'm impressed about a few things about your book. First is this. It's very compact. It's very hard to write compact book. Don't get me wrong when I say compact. It's good. It's a compliment. Because it means you need to select what to get out of that.
Right.
So it's a lot of work, I guess.
That was a big challenge. I wrote basically 6 times as much as you're holding in your hand, and then the editing process was long and hard.
Long and hard. And yeah, writing a book is a huge commitment, and you have been quite active in the product community for years now. What inspired you to write this book?
What inspired me to write this book is what also inspired me to go into coaching and advising like you do as well. And that's the realization that there's 2 main problems that we're all facing. One is that a lot of what we're launching is actually not of very high value. It either does nothing or sometimes does negative things. And from time to time, we launch something good, but it's not very consistent. Until I joined Google, I didn't find a system to kind of consistently deliver value for the users and for the business. Problem number 2, even if you understand how it works, even if you read all the books, if you know about product discovery, it's very hard to implement in most organizations. And that's the main challenge I try to address with this book.
Good. Yeah, it's a hard challenge, like consistency. Because as you said, many times deliver a lot of things. Some do good, some do nothing good, even bad sometimes. And how do you find consistency? So you said about Google. So you want to solve that to bring some clarity and this a little bit less than 200 pages.
Yeah, exactly. This is basically what I learned over 20 years of making every possible mistake, working in all the wrong models. And so I can really relate when people come to me and say, this is really hard in our organization.
Cool. That's cool. Yeah, when we look at product discovery now, you're talking about some of these challenges. Because one of the things I see throughout companies is the question, how can we do it when we have opinion-driven roadmaps, for example? And I know your book helps defeat this challenge. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that, please?
So I'm one of the people who say you shouldn't be trying to do output roadmaps, definitely not for 6 or 12 months. I'm not even a huge fan of the now, next, later sort of roadmap. Sorry, everyone. I'm really in the camp of the outcome roadmaps. You should start from the outcomes you want to create, the OKRs, if you like, the company-wide OKRs. You should lay these on a timeline and say, by end of Q3, we want to achieve this goal.
Mm-hmm.
And then work your way backwards into what you need to do in order to achieve that. And what you need to do often is to do some research. Obviously, you did strategy already beforehand because that's the result of the OKRs. And then you need to change on 4 levels. You need to set good goals at company level and team level. You need to pick ideas based on their merit about which answering the questions, what impact they will have on these goals, how expensive they're going to be, and what level of confidence you have in them. And then you need to pick the ideas that looks most promising and test them. And that's, of course, the heart of product discovery. So validation of the key assumptions, and then reevaluate the ideas based on that. And finally, you need to somehow inject all of this into the works of your team that is probably working in Agile and is probably optimized towards delivery. And you should come to them and sort of introduce them to the fact that they need to do discovery as well. So everything I just discovered, I cover in a framework, just because we needed another framework. There weren't enough, called GIST: goals, ideas, steps, and tasks, that do exactly those 4 areas of change. I created it because it was so hard for my clients to make the change, that I felt that if we break it into these 4 chunks and they can tackle them one at a time, it's an easier transition. And even if you just do the goals part right and everything else is still very much waterfallish, that's already a good start. If you're getting better at prioritization, that's already going to take you a big step forward. If you're better at experimentation, even if the other things are not quite in place, that's a major improvement. If you change the way your team works, that's really good. And you don't have to start from the top. You can do them out of order. So that's the heart of what I just described. This is what's described in the book.
Yeah. And I like very much when you say start from the goal. Because if you don't have a goal, it will be very hard to decide where you want to explore with product discovery. And another thing that you say, which I see quite often being ignored, is what is your level of confidence? So many times we have an idea, we talk to a friend, and this level of confidence talking to a friend that might not even be in the target audience goes from 0 to 80%. I'm confident. We should go all in.
Exactly. Yeah,
It's quite interesting.
well, it's human nature. I did the same mistake with my book initially. I thought it should be about X, and then later on, when I tested it way too late, I realized it should actually be a little bit more about X and Y. It's very easy to fall into this trap. We all do it. So evidence guided is about forcing yourself to confront reality, just escaping your brains, escaping the consensus, which is easy to achieve, and really challenge yourself and say what level of confidence we have. And I created a tool, you may be familiar with it, called the confidence meter, that tries to assess how sure you should be about the impact of your idea and the ease as well. And if it's only based on your opinion, because you're a super smart guy, and some anecdotal evidence and the consensus of the team, that gives you maybe 1 out of 10 potential. To really get into the higher levels of confidence, and even medium confidence is hard, you need to collect data and analyze it. You need to start running experiments. You need to go as high as needed with that particular idea. Not every idea needs to go all the way full scale, but for many ideas that are a little bit expensive or a little bit risky, you need to go at least to medium. And most companies don't do this. And once they introduce this tool, at least the discussion changes, and at least they are aware that they're not doing as much validation as they should.
Yeah, what I like about this approach is force them to confront reality. Because as you said, it's normal. We will all make these mistakes. We think we know it best. But if you can bring the elements to make the discussions happen, let's test, let's start, and let's see, confront reality, and then we move. And one thing like we are talking about is already, you outline many effective methods of product discovery in the book, your framework, the confidence meter, which I like pretty much. But looking in your experience, more than 20 years, can you share something where an unconventional discovery method led to maybe a surprising insight?
So in chapter 1, I tell the story of the tabbed inbox. If you use Gmail, there's a chance you're actually using the tabbed inbox. It kind of tries to organize your inbox based on category. So it recognizes promotions and social updates. And there are a couple of other categories you can enable in settings if you like. But that was a very controversial idea when I presented it in Gmail. I came up with this because I was, unlike my colleagues who were very diligent at cleaning their inboxes, they were small inboxers, as we call them, or zero inboxers. I was lazy, and my inbox was fully cluttered with this stuff. And I felt it will be magical if the inbox would be smart and kind of self-organized. But my implementation of this, the user experience I had in mind, was pretty crappy, honestly, in hindsight. I presented this to the team, I presented this to the managers, and they all said, we're not convinced at all. And that forced on me to start collecting evidence. And luckily, my team was willing to help me. So we did data research, we did interviews, customer interviews, and we were shocked how really big problem this was for the casual user. The sophisticated users like you and probably most of the listeners don't have these problems because they know how to use filters, they know how to use the different mechanisms of Gmail, sorry, but most users don't, and they lived in these piles and piles of junk. So we did a bunch of evaluations, but one of them was a Wizard of Oz test, which is not unconventional, but not used enough. So what we did is we brought 12 participants into our usability lab. We interviewed them whether or not they have the problem that we saw. 10 of them had this problem. 2 kind of knew how to manage their inbox. And while we distracted them, first off, they signed on a kind of a release that allowed us to look into their inbox and manipulate it a little bit without, of course, we didn't take any personal information out of it or anything. But then after the interview, the researcher kind of showed them, we have something to show you. Can you look at this? And what they saw is something that looked like Gmail, but it had tabs in it. And one of the tabs was called notifications. That was the name we had for it, and social and promotions. And in it was their actual email, just send her a message. They couldn't really click into the messages, and organized based on these categories. And those 10 people who didn't have a solution were blown away by this. They loved it so much. They were smiling. They were like, when can I have this? This is perfect. They understood completely how to use it and why it was there. But of course, this was a complete sham. What we did is actually, while we were talking to them, a bunch of us were moving just the messages to where we were thought completely manually. So we didn't have the automation yet. We saved ourselves a ton of time by not trying to build up the classification. It turned out to be a huge machine learning problem later on. We had to assemble a team, and it took us a year to do it right. But we could test the effect very early on with this Wizard of Oz experiment. And that gave us a tremendous amount of confidence boost that this idea is actually very powerful for those 85% of the population that they don't know how to manage their inbox. So for me, this was a moment of revelation. And once you experience this, and once you have the data to show managers and skeptics from such an experiment, this is a very transformative experience for any product person.
Yeah, like that you did whatever you could to experiment, and you use the Wizard of Oz. And yes, it's not unconventional, but not that used. I see many times trying to go with more advanced solutions, and sometimes they say, what is the fastest way of learning? And I miss this urge to learn, and I see a huge urge to implement. And as you said, later on, it took a lot of time. The implementation can be hard, but we should be able to implement the right thing.
Exactly. There's this drive or this fear that a lot of us have that unless we show the user something very complete and very polished and very real, there's no point in testing, or we will disappoint them, or we will ruin our reputation or our brand. And those are usually baseless fears. It's much better that you do put something a little bit embarrassing and you learn quickly. It's not exactly what they want, or that it's amazing. Instead of polishing it and building it and scaling it and then realizing it's actually not so good.
Yeah, that's true. And then looking at the balance between data-driven discovery and intuitive decision-making, especially in early-stage product. How do you do that? How do you recommend people to handle that?
I think it's very important to say this. What I'm trying to do is not to replace human judgment or opinions or consensus. These are important things, and without them, we will not be able to build products. Until that moment where ChatGPT or, I don't know, machine learning can replace all of us, but that's a few years away at least. What we need to do is to learn to balance this with evidence. to have a firm feeling that, yeah, we found the next big thing, but also use evidence. So especially in early stage startups, for example, or in startups in general, the founders should have a say. The founders should come with their ideas. They're the visionaries. They should kind of drive the vision, the ideation. They're actually the first product people of the organization. But it should be legitimate for anyone to say, even to the founder, what's the evidence? How do we know that this is true? I mean, we could now rush and burn all our investment money on building this version 1.0 and rush it to the market. And that's what a lot of startups do, and this is how they burn out very quickly. What can we do to learn whether the key assumptions in this idea actually are valid? What's the mean viable approach? And Eric Ries wrote an entire book dedicated to startups called The Lean Startup. If you haven't read it, go ahead and read it. It's one of the foundational books of product management. And what he suggests is to do build, measure, learn loops. Try to learn in a huge rate as a startup is. And the key focus here is not just the build, not just the measure, the learn. Be very honest about the results and take drastic measures if the idea doesn't work. Either you pivot it or you kill it and you move on to something else as early as possible while you still have runway. And a lot of startups fail to do this, and then they're kind of stuck in development hell where they're building the wrong thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I like very much the idea of the lean startup. And the book was written some time ago and it's highly valid. But the point of what you say, human judgment is not going to be replaced. We need still to use that. But it should not be the end point is how fast can we validate our assumptions? So name the assumptions, validate them, and then you can pivot. I was talking to some investors and I asked them, what is the difference between the startups that make it and the ones that break it? And I said, there is one difference. Is how long does it take for them to realize they have to pivot? And I was with this thought in mind. He said, you can't be sure. The first idea is not going to work. The second, maybe, potentially not. The third idea after the pivot, yes, it's going to. So it's the time. How long does it take?
Exactly. Even if you stumble on a great idea, which happens, good ideas need iteration to actually maximize their potential. If you just go ahead and implement it as you imagine it, like I did with my initial implementation of the tabbed inbox, if we launched that thing that I came up with, it would have been terrible. We pivoted it strongly. We changed the user experience very strongly. We changed the categorization. We did a million things along the way because we learned. And that's part of it's not just about testing whether the idea is valid, it's also improving it. And for a startup, there's no other way. And I would argue that that's true also for a scale-up, for an enterprise. But that's a topic for another discussion.
Yeah, I would agree with you also. Yeah, it's a huge topic. But there are some companies like Amazon that has mentality day one. So let's keep the mentality of day one.
Yeah.
But
well,
when we look at
it's a good question to ask an Amazonian if they feel that this is implemented, because I found that in these big companies, there are pockets where this is actually the culture, and there are other pockets where it's a little bit different.
Yeah, that's a good point, because it's a gigantic organization. So it's very unlikely that every place in the organization will work the same way.
Yeah.
But when we go to common mistakes and misconceptions, what I understand is even if the PMs are great and they understand many things about product discovery and so on, they will still face some challenge. And I want to ask you, what are some common mistakes and misconceptions in terms of product discovery?
So I'll use the GIST model to try to highlight some of those that I see, but there are many, and I'm just touching the surface, and probably you can surface some that I missed. So in terms of goals, I think the most common mistake is to start with an output goal, to say our goal is to launch this thing. Sometimes you hide it as an outcome, but it's actually let's launch our pet project. Or having too many goals, or having no metrics, or not measuring anything, or struggling to measure. Good goals are measurable and are concrete, and are very specific, and they create a lot of alignment, and they say also what we're not doing. Without this basis, it's a little bit hard to do product discovery, because product discovery is trying to optimize towards a goal, to find solutions, and sometimes it's more than one idea that achieve the goal. But if the goal is not there, it's really hard to do discovery. The second thing is about idea evaluation, and often we use I-scores. We touched on this: impact, confidence, and ease. But there it's tempting to just, and you mentioned this, to just throw guessworks. Oh, this sounds like a high impact idea to me, and confidence is 8 out of 10. Why? Because I talked to 3 customers. This is a very common mistake. It's okay to start with guesswork, but you should lower the confidence. If all your confidence is based on your gut feeling or the consensus, as we said, that's never more than 0.5 to 1. If you have a bit of anecdotal evidence, 3 customers ask for it, bump it a little. If you actually ran a survey and a lot of customers said they are interested, bump it a bit more. If you ran a Wizard of Oz like I did, yeah, that's a big bump forward, but still not full, and so on and so forth. So use eyes correctly, and that's a major misconception I see, how to use eyes. Eyes, 90% of the time that I encounter teams using eyes, they're misusing it. The third step is, or the third part is steps, and this is about introducing those build, measure, learn loops. And one phenomenon that I know, because I read an early version of your book as well, that you encountered as well, is teams that do too few steps. They do one usability test, and then, yeah, idea validated, from now on it's all delivery. Or they wait way too long to launch an MVP, a minimal viable product that is actually pretty much the entire product, just maybe not fully debugged. It's what we used to call beta when I was starting back in the day. But now it's an MVP. It's what are you working on in the last 8 months? The MVP. How many experiments you ran so far? Well, none, because we're building an MVP. That's a terrible mistake too. You have a lot of validation techniques available to you. I have a whole chapter about them. I list 28 in my book, and probably there's another 20 that I didn't include. And you should use them. And many of them require no coding, no effort almost. You can just start right away with very simple techniques. And you can eliminate a lot of ideas this way. And then you have more room to test more ideas. Finally, in the tasks, a very common mistake is to treat, and this is a lot of PMs are guilty of this, is to treat the product team as a delivery team. I'm the PM, I'm going to do all the discovery for you guys, and then I'll tell you what to do. And the team is okay with this too, because they worked as a delivery team for so long. So just give us the ticket, man. And if the product succeeds, if the experiments fail, it's not our problem. We're just delivering, right? That's the work distribution. Don't do this. Turn them into a discovery team as well as a delivery team, and work with the CTO to eliminate any sort of incentives that are just about delivery, etc. So those are just a few of the many anti-patterns, and you feel free to complement or to add for what I missed.
I connect to them very much. What I see a lot is what you mentioned about the strength of the evidence. So even when teams start testing assumption, is the question I ask, like, how far does it take for them to jump from validated to implementation? You tackle that. So it's a confidence meter. If they use that, they get this sorted out. But one thing I got quite curious, you mentioned that 99% of the teams use the eyes incorrectly. I have been against eyes because of that, but I want to know what is incorrect for you.
So incorrect is accumulating a huge idea bank of 200 ideas and not cleaning it up. In my opinion, ideas are like bugs. You need to trash them and park 90% of them. So your idea bank is very compact. Second is relying on guesswork, doing an ICE once based on guesswork and available data, and after that picking the ideas, and that's kind of fitting into the roadmap. So that's really maybe improving a little bit your consensus building mechanism, but it's not really doing much. You need to redo ICE every time you have new evidence, in my opinion. By the way, ICE is not the only way. A lot of companies do this intuitively. And that's
Mm-hmm.
legitimate. If that's your culture, you don't like numbers, you just like to evaluate things on big, medium, a small, medium, large, that's fine by me, or just gut feeling, but use the evidence. Have the discussion based on the evidence. You don't have to put numbers. And then another mistake is to delegate kind of the decision making to the I score. And the I score, which is often just multiplying the three numbers, I, C, and E, or averaging them. Shona Ellis, the originator of ICE, suggested averaging, is a very simplistic heuristic. You can't really trust it, especially when the confidence is low. The fact that you have an 8 and a 3 there doesn't mean that tomorrow, once you run the test, it will not change to a 5 and a 4 or to some other number. So don't trust the numbers too much at these early stages. It's just a hint. And it's not about what do we intend to build in full, it's what do we need to test first. That's the purpose of ICE in my mind.
I like this definition because the anti-pattern I have seen is you have this score and then you rank, you take the highest score and you go all in. So I have seen many companies doing that. And in my case, it helped teaching ICE. But as you said, it's not the only method. But in the end of the day, what I say is prioritization is a bet. You need to have the goal to start with. You relate to the goal and you bet. And it should be an incremental bet. The more evidence you gather, the more you can invest. And if you don't get evidence that justify investment, like you said, put it in the trash, go back, take another idea.
Exactly.
Sometimes companies are very easily falling prey into the biases. So there is the classic sunk cost fallacy. So the more invested we are, the more we want to invest.
It is very true. All the tools that we provide, all the frameworks, everything is just a way for teams to implement the right principles. The process itself is not the goal. So ICE can help you do that if you use ICE correctly, but there are other methods to do the same thing. But the mechanism, the principle is exactly what you described. Pick a bunch of ideas, bet on them, but hedge your bets based on your confidence, and then just go in incrementally the more confidence you have. What I did find with ICE, by the way, that it does help cut short a lot of discussions and debates because people tend to pontificate and convince each other with opinions, but ICE sometimes cuts these discussions shorter, especially the question about what evidence do we have that relates to confidence.
That's cool. And on the other side of the coin, sometimes when teams are creating an idea from scratch, they may lack the data, so they go step by step. But in some scale-ups, they have loads of data and an abundance of user feedback. And then they fall into analysis paralysis, keep discussing before they can progress. When they face that, how do you suggest them to break free from this situation?
I think that's a symptom rather than the problem itself. Usually what happens is there's no clear goal and no clear metric they're optimizing for. So everything might look good. Second, when they launch an experiment, they don't plan the experiments too well. They don't define clearly what are the assumptions we're validating, clearly what are the metrics we're collecting, and they're doing too big an experiment. So there's big jumps to the MVP or to the user, even as usability test sometimes is a big step. And you need to test too many things. It's all accumulated in this one big experiment that generates a lot of data. If it's a qualitative experiment, if it's a usability test or interviews, it generates a lot of, qualitative data that is subject to interpretation, and not all of us are good at interpreting this data. So all of this might lead people to, spend a lot of time analyzing the data, letting the experiment run for way too long, going back and rerunning the experiment because someone wants to move the goalpost and said, the results maybe are not positive, but maybe it's because we didn't run the experiment with the right people. Or so all of this, can become very ineffective if you don't know what you're doing. You need to be very good at cutting experiments short, time boxing them, defining the goals, defining the assumptions, and just doing the minimum it takes to get to that end point where you learn. And it's really important for people to understand discovery is not an infinite process. It has to have an end where we switch to delivery. That's very important. And your managers and your stakeholders have a very limited budget of patience for you discovering. If you didn't discover this yet, you will pretty soon. So don't stretch their patience too much. Try to get to the learnings as soon as possible and then switch to delivery on the right ideas.
True. What the point you mentioned about clarifying what are we discovering, what are we trying to validate here, and what does success look like? Sometimes I get surprised. Some teams are resistant to do that. They say, no, let's run the experiment and we decide after the experiment. That is asking for long discussions, because if someone likes the idea, you're trying to find the confirmation, and they will find reasons to confirm it worked. Or maybe, as you said, the audience is wrong or something. It's highly important to know what you're doing, so why you're doing that, and then you run the experiments like a scientist. There's an expected result. Either it's a pass or it's a fail. There's nothing in between.
Totally. I mean, that's something that we need to teach managers as well as the teams, because managers often are the ones pushing back on the results and second guessing and asking for another experiment. So they're causing some of this analysis paralysis, quote unquote. Having said that, I think people fear analysis paralysis way too often, and it's a way to push back on discovery. It's like, we don't have time for this, and we really are afraid that the team will waste time analyzing stuff. Let's just build it and see what happens, right? Run 100% A/B experiment, essentially, just an A. That's the worst way to test an idea, and that's the most expensive and costly way. So definitely don't fear analysis paralysis as much as you should fear launching terrible ideas out there. And
yeah,
yeah,
what I like saying about discovery is product discovery done right proves you are wrong fast enough. So it's about learning what we don't know. But you touched one point, which is about implementing. What we know is, unfortunately, many teams haven't seen this kind of way of working. So they may be working on a feature factory mode where they have to deliver more output. And some people don't know where to start. And the question is, which strategies can you suggest for fostering a discovery mindset when the traditional way of working is execution?
Yeah. Well, that's the billion-dollar question, right? There's a lot of consultants, a lot of books out there, a lot of workshops just on this topic, transformation. Marty published a book just recently on this topic. I can't say that there's one strategy that I found that works, but there's a lot of tactics and a lot of things you can do to start nudging the organization in the right direction. It's very, very hard. It's much harder than any other challenge that we face. One is to start showing that there's a real problem, because your managers and stakeholders may think everything is okay. They're coming up with the right ideas. If you do ask them what's the problem, they would say execution. You guys are not executing fast enough. If we just bumped up velocity, it will be all fine. So if you could show them in a gentle way, not too offensive, that last year's roadmap that they created was 80% crap. What we launched actually didn't improve the business or didn't help the users that much. It took double the time we estimated. There were better ideas that were dropped and actually, in hindsight, were stronger. And you can translate this, if you're handy with a little bit of a spreadsheet, and can translate this into a dollar or euro number of how much they're wasting. The saying in advertising, 50% of my advertising budget is wasted. I just don't know which 50. It's a classic advertisers thing. It's even worse in product development. I think 66%, 70% of your engineering budget is wasted. And why? Because of bad decisions of which ideas to put into the roadmap. So surface this problem to them. Say there is a problem and there is a solution. Should we experiment? Another thing is to enlist the help of developers and some top executives that are excited to change. There's always some. And the developers especially tend to resonate with discovery because they want a more scientific way to to build, and they know that a lot of what they're building is meaningless. And they didn't come into engineering just to build stuff because management or some PM thinks it's good. They want to change the world. So if you show them this way, and I've done quite a few workshops for engineers, they will be a very strong forcing function in the organization. And a lot of organizations want to work in a way that the engineers are happy with. So that helps. Also finding a champion, a top executive, whether it's the CPO or the CTO that will back you up, very important. Another thing is don't try to rush into it and do it all at once. Product discovery, doing strategy correctly, doing goals correctly, product evaluation, all of these things are major changes from what you're doing today. So kind of staging it and realizing this is going to be a journey rather than a sprint, and it will take multiple quarters, is a better approach. And thinking about incremental improvements rather than just one big jump, all of these good things, Kaizen. And ultimately, what you want to create is to carve out a safe space where you are allowed to experiment with a new process and run things with a different playbook. Ideally, not in the critical path, not in the product that everyone is really, that's generating all the money, not in the, the big venture, but in something that is a bit sideline and less important, and they're allowing you to play with it, run with it for a couple of quarters, share a lot, share the evidence you create, you find, show them how you're thinking about ideas, show them how you're moving towards the business goals that they're excited about, and build trust. That's really important. Trust is the key word here. And once you succeed, you launch a meaningful idea that really moves the needle, celebrate this widely, make a big fuss out of it. And that will encourage other people to consider, maybe we should do this across the board.
Great answer. Great. It's like we start the conversation, help them confront reality. So show what is happening. Where's the money going? So I like saying, once you hurt the most sensitive organ of the human being, the pocket, they will listen.
I like that. Yeah. That's the language, dollars and euros, that they understand the best.
Yeah, but it's important what you continue elaborating, which is, it is a step by step, it's a journey. And if you try bringing everything at once, it is very unlikely you can pull it all together and make it work. And if you try making the big product of the company, where's the cash cow, it's another game. So you need to find the safe space to try it out, like finding the winnings. So it doesn't matter the size. You need to win with something.
Exactly.
To excite the others. I like this very much.
Yeah, you need to realize that their butts are on the line. I mean, if you fail with your product, eventually it might trickle up to the manager, to the CEO, the board might be unhappy. So they bear the responsibility. So you need to reassure them that they will not face really negative consequences.
Correct. And that's why the importance of having a champion by your side and building the trust with the champion, it's fundamental. And then you need to deliver on the promise. So you need to do your best. You need to make it work.
That's the hard part, yeah.
That's the hard part, but it's where you start.
Yeah.
And when we look in terms of team dynamics, what roles or skills are often undervalued, or I would say even overlooked in a successful discovery implementation?
So you probably know this as well as I do. Teams tend to be under-resourced when it comes to researchers, user researchers, data analysts, even designers. I meet here product teams in Europe that build user interfaces, and they don't have a user designer sometimes, or they have one shared across, 50 people. So this is very important to have these resources. I was lucky to have these resources in Google. In the States, I think the culture exists that you need to have them. But in Europe, for some reason, we invest much more in process people, agile coaches and scrum masters and stuff like that. And I think you're better off, not disrespect to any of these people. I'm sure they're doing a lot of important work. You need to invest also in researchers. That's very important. The other kind of undervalued skill is customer focus. In way too many companies I meet, the managers expect the product managers to focus solely on the business. You're in the service of the business. You need to make money, to make rain. And when that product manager says, yeah, but I want to talk to some customers, to interview them, I want to do market research. For what? We have a sales team for this. You need to talk to the sales team, right? It's a very, very important thing to allow product managers to build this market expertise. They really need to understand the users and the customers and the multiple personas often better than they understand themselves, to really be able to tell their stories, what's causing them pain right now, what are their underachieved ambitions, and bring this knowledge back into the company. That's also the superpower of a PM in my mind. It's not just the person who writes user stories. There needs to be depth behind this, and the team will respect your user stories or your specs much more if they come with this depth of understanding the users. Then there are some skills like market segmentation, market sizing, identifying opportunities and challenges, understanding customer values, which I consider foundationals to product management, and I teach them in my courses, but a lot of product managers don't have them, unfortunately. So it's kind of, I don't know why it's not being taught quite enough. And lastly, something that used to be popular and is less now is this ability to just hack stuff, to just have 20% time or some resources to just come up with crazy ideas and just hack them and see what happens. And a lot of really important step function products were developed this way. Gmail is one of those, by the way, and the iPhone, and there's so many. And a lot of companies don't do this. They just want this very regimented, very structured, very top-down process of developing products, which kills all the innovation that comes bottom-up, especially from engineers. So really important to rekindle this spirit.
I connect very much to everything you said. Coming from Brazil, in Brazil, it was common to have one UX in each team. That was how I worked, and it was very unlikely to not have it. Then I moved to Germany. The companies I worked here, some of them had like 10 teams, product teams, one researcher sharing with all the others, and it was a dispute. And I was very surprised with that. And then someone told me, if you need to do user researcher, we have this agency here. You can hire them, then they will do something for you. And I was like this, seriously? That doesn't sound like building a product. That sounds something different. I said, yeah, but this is our process, how we follow. Then it goes again to what you said, following a process, being very oriented on user research as a process, has this result, and then we give it to the team. And the job of a PM is to ensure the implementation is right.
Yeah, it's pretty sad. I've seen companies where if you want to evaluate the impact of an idea, there's a business intelligence sort of team, a BI team, where you give them the idea and they come back with a dollar number and say, this idea is going to stand to create that many dollars of profit. And I find this ridiculous as well. But it's kind of how some organizations operate.
Yeah. And the room to try out things, it's super important and super ignored, because I hear very often from C-level, we pay gold for engineers, so we need to ensure they are delivering valuable output. But if you don't give them motivation to bring their creativity, to bring their best to the company, then they will not be software engineers, they will become coders. They code whatever they receive, so how can they bring creativity? And there's a wrong thinking that software engineers code only they are super creative. They're very close to the product. What you need to do is connect the dots, as you said, customers. So you need to listen to the customers, because the more proxies you have, the message will get a little bit different.
And the third part is they do bring their creativity, but because you constrain it, you don't allow them to come up with product ideas. They funnel it all into quality projects and, replatforming and this huge engineering initiatives that can slow down a company very much. Sometimes they're necessary, but often it's just funneling all this frustrated energy of the engineering org into something they do control, and that competes with the success of the product sometimes. So you will do yourself actually a service by allowing them to also contribute to the product directly.
Yes. And when you look ahead, how do you envision the evolution of product discovery in the face of all the emerging technologies, like AI, for example?
That's a great question. I honestly don't know. I don't think anyone knows. We're all speculating at this time, but it is going to be transformative, I'm pretty sure. I'll give you my best guess, and I'm interested to hear your thoughts as well. I think that it's a mixed blessing. On one hand, it might actually be a very powerful tool for things like research, creating quick mockups, writing interview scripts, writing specifications to some degree, coding. Maybe the more kind of mundane coding will be more automated, data analysis, experiment result analysis, even ideation. This thing can help us. So all of these things, injecting also a little bit of AI might actually either save time or expand our thinking, assuming that they raise the level of accuracy and it doesn't hallucinate on you too much. So this could be a positive thing, and this might be an accelerator for a lot of our work. The dangers I see are just as pronounced, which is, first off, it might be perceived as a cost-cutting mechanism, especially in these scarce resources. So if before we needed a user researcher or a data analyst, now we just need software for these things. Why should we actually do this? Just let's the ChatGPT do the analysis or automate most of our research for us, which is really wrong. You really need a person behind these things. Then I think it might make it a little bit easier to produce junk features, to increase velocity in a sense. And it kind of might amplify some of the anti-patterns like hippo or feature bloat in a product or just rushing out stuff, because we can get from ideation to a fully designed interface in a matter of an hour, something that might have taken much longer. So now it's just a matter of let's code it and launch it. Easy.
Mhm.
Don't do it. The fact that the bot gives you a very convincing UI doesn't mean that's a good idea, or doesn't mean you need to launch it whatsoever. It might kind of kill our ability to innovate because it's easier to copy. What the bot will tell you is kind of a sum average of what the industry is usually doing. But that's not necessarily the right answer in many cases. Sometimes the least expected answer is the right one. And what worries me is it will further diminish the ability of people to think and to analyze, which is really a tough challenge because people don't like to think. People like to act. We know this. There's all books written about this. And now when the algorithm is there to kind of help you think, they can maybe the algorithm will prioritize for you or tell you what's happening in the market. You don't need to think about this too much. You just trust it and you go ahead and act on what this thing says. Don't give up on this ability. I think the thinking companies have a huge advantage today and tomorrow. We talked about Amazon and Google. One of their skills is they are willing to spend the time thinking and really analyzing and evaluating things.
Yeah. So it's a double-edged sword. So it can help, but it can damage. It will really depend on how you use. And I have some fear similar in your direction. So it will become easier to do some things. And if you look at ChatGPT, for example, it's very convincing. Whatever you ask there, it will give an answer with 100% certainty. And sometimes I wonder how long will it take for people to start challenging? Because I look at LinkedIn, for example, there's this collaborative article. Sometimes I see some things there, I say, whoa, how did they come to that? Using Lean Canvas to create a product vision. I say, whoa, that's quite different. How do you use Lean Canvas to create a product vision? And some people start seeing, wow, that's great, but it doesn't mean it's great. And then it comes to the point of shortcuts. Some things in life, they need time. And what I see the advantage, what can be helped with AI, and I imagine more on that in the future, is something that Shiva and I talked last time. It is about being an amplifier, a co-pilot. It will help you, but you need to be on the leading seat. I'll give you an example. I wanted to analyze the feedback I received for my book. So I had more or less 2,000 people who are saying, I want to get your book, and why they wanted. So I wanted to see what it makes sense there. So I used AI to help me analyze, but then I still needed to decide what am I going to do with that. So at some point, you need to see what kind of questions you have. So if you have the questions in perspective, that can help you. But still, you need to use your judgment and test it. It doesn't mean that you get the answer from ChatGPT that pleases you, go ahead and just do it. No, you still need to confront reality, as we started here. My fear is what you said. Some companies will say, big cost cut opportunity. Let's just go for that. We get ChatGPT for everyone in the company. So we pay $25 per month and that's it. And then we don't need to pay more people. That will backfire very quickly. That's what I imagine.
Yeah, for sure.
Very great, very good insight. So Itamar, thanks a lot for sharing so much insight from the book, beyond the book. Are there any final words you'd like to leave to our audience?
Well, I can speak from my depth of experience because I've been doing this for, I don't know, 25, 27 years. Back in the day, we had more freedom, more power when I started as product manager, more empowerment in a sense, but far fewer tools, methodological tools. Like we didn't know what product discovery was. We didn't know about design thinking. We didn't have all these books that have been written since then. And so we did a lot of wrong things. Now the situation is kind of flipped. We have a lot of theory. We have a lot of very powerful tools, but we're working in much more structured organizations that are constraining what we're allowed to do. A product manager is maybe less powerful than they used to be. So it may put you in a situation where you feel like you're very constrained or that everything is wrong. You read the books, you look around you, everything is different, everything is wrong, and you can get very frustrated very easily. I think you should keep an open mind and remain skeptical, both of your own feelings, because you may interpret the situation a little bit too harshly. And as you rise up the ladder, you might find that there are other perspectives from what you are thinking right now. And second, stay skeptical, both about the ideas and the axioms and the whatever people are saying inside the company that is a must-have and what is wrong, but also stay skeptical of the processes. And I'm saying this as someone who invented some processes and wrote a book about it and writing articles. Take them at face value, test them, and see the results. And if it works for you, adopt it. If it doesn't work, you can pivot it, change it, or dump it, just like you do with product ideas. So keep thinking, stay skeptical. That's my key advice.
Wonderful. Thinking, learning, trying out things. One thing that you said reminds me quite a lot of my experience. When I started, I read some books, but I hadn't read all of them. And at some point, I needed to test some ideas. And I said, how is the fastest way of testing this? And I didn't know the word product discovery. I said, maybe I just go and I meet with some customers, I talk to them, and I show something and I see how they react. And I started trying out things. Many things didn't work at all, but I had the space to try out and learn and pivot on the way. But it's a lot about what you said, is thinking. So many times we ask the question, which framework could help me here? Or which process could I put here? Or how could I adapt this process? But I don't think this is the best question. It's like, what is the best action for me to achieve this goal I have here? So then you can see, then maybe you find a framework or a piece of the framework that could help you. Thinking is very important. And today, with this amount and abundance of frameworks, it's easy to say, let's color inside the lines. Let's go here and try without knowing it. So
Totally.
Also here from my side, another person who creates a lot of templates saying, but I always say, use it if it helps you, but you need to learn and adapt to your scenario. I don't know all scenarios. Things are different in different places.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. It's very similar to what you said about ChatGPT. You need to embrace it as a tool, but you need to stay the pilot and keep judging whether or not it's helping you. So human judgment is still a very key part of product development, product management. You cannot just let go and just trust the process or AI algorithm.
No. So Itamar, how do people reach out to you to grab more knowledge?
Sure. So my site, which is called after me, surprisingly, itamargilad.com. Probably you'll share the links in the comments. Is where you can find a lot of the resources I mentioned. So if you want to download the confidence meter, or you want to download my ebook about validating ideas, or I have a bunch of other tools for all of these different layers that I mentioned. That's where you find it. There's also a newsletter. I welcome you to join it. If the biggest resource I have is the book that I spent 4.5 years writing and rewriting, which you hold right now in your hand, and that you can find in evidenceguided.com. And it's available at many platforms. And I think that's the best way I can help a lot of people today, just by allowing them to read the book.
Great. So thanks a lot. And to everyone watching this, remember that the journey of product discovery requires learning, adapting, innovating, and a lot of patience. It takes a long time. And don't forget, grab your book, Evidence Guided. And I'm telling you, this is a great one. If you want to create value sooner and drop bad ideas fast enough, just go for it. Thanks.
Thank you very much, David.